8-year-old Jalen Brooks sat at the edge of his seat, sneakers tapping quietly beneath his desk, trying to hold in a storm of excitement that had been building all week. His classroom at Prescott Elementary smelled faintly of dry erase markers and peanut butter sandwiches. The afternoon sun poured through the blinds, casting golden slats of light across the alphabet posters on the wall. It was career week, and today wasn't just any day. It was the day his dad was coming. He had imagined it 100 times. The door creaking open, the silence falling, and his dad walking and wearing his NASA badge, the same one that dangled from his chest every morning as he kissed Jalen goodbye. He didn't wear a cape or a superhero suit. But in Jalen's eyes, Dr. Kelvin Brooks didn't need one. He built things that talked to Mars. At recess, while the other boys ran for the swings or traded Pokemon cards, Jalen stayed close to the classroom window, peeking through the blinds just in case his dad arrived early. His fingers drummed against the glass, heart thumping with rhythm only a proud son could understand. That morning, when he woke up, he had carefully picked out his brightest red shirt and brushed his hair exactly the way his dad liked it, sharp and clean, as Kelvin always said. He had even packed his dad's favorite snack in his lunchbox, just in case they had a moment together after the talk. Apple slices with peanut butter. Most kids dreaded talking about their parents in front of class, but not Jalen. He had spent the whole week preparing. Each night, he'd practice in the mirror, using his dad's big words like orbit and communication systems, and even drew a picture of a satellite calling home from space. He added bold letters at the top. My dad works for NASA. The night before, he had sat on his bed clutching one of his dad's NASA folders. Can I show this to class? He'd asked, eyes wide. Kelvin had smiled gently and sat beside him. Buddy, I don't think I'm allowed to bring classified stuff to show and tell. Not even one little page? Jalen pleaded. Kelvin ruffled his son's curls. You don't need pages. All you need is your voice. Just tell them what I do, and tell them you're proud. Jalen hesitated. What if they don't believe me? His father's expression shifted, thoughtful and quiet. He leaned back on one elbow. Then that's their problem, not yours. Jalen lowered his eyes. But what if they laugh? Kelvin paused, his voice steady but heavy. Then you keep your head up and remember this. The truth doesn't need applause. It just needs someone brave enough to say it. That moment clung to Jalen's chest like armor. He held it close as the morning unfolded, as the spelling quiz ended early to make room for the day's presentations, and as Mr. Denton asked the students to go around the room and share what their parents did. He straightened his back when it was his turn, heart thudding, voice clear. My dad, he said proudly, works at NASA. There was a beat of silence, not the kind filled with awe, the kind filled with disbelief. A boy in the back snorted. Someone whispered, yeah, right. But the one that crushed Jalen's chest the hardest wasn't from the kids. It came from the front of the room. Mr. Denton, khakis pressed, polo shirt tucked in, thinning hair combed with precision, let out a soft, low chuckle. Not loud, but deep. The kind of laugh that doesn't just question your words. It questions you. NASA, huh? He said, raising an eyebrow. That's quite the imagination, Jalen. Maybe next time we aim for something a little more realistic. Laughter bubbled up around the room. A few students leaned over to whisper. One girl mimicked the teacher's words under her breath. More realistic, like it was all just a game, a fantasy. Jalen's mouth stayed shut. His eyes dropped to the blue and green carpet beneath his desk. The drawing in his folder now felt childish, the words like lies. His hands, which had been flailing excitedly just minutes before, curled into fists in his lap. His shoulders sank, and the proudest moment of his life collapsed in a heartbeat. Have you ever been so proud of someone you couldn't wait to tell the world, only to be met with silence or worse, laughter? But the day wasn't over, and sometimes the truth doesn't knock. It walks in wearing a badge that no one can ignore. If you've ever felt overlooked for telling the truth, this story is for you. Leave a yes or no in the comments if you've ever doubted your own voice after someone else dismissed it. And if you believe the world needs to hear more stories about courage, family, and quiet strength, hit the like button and subscribe. Because sometimes all it takes is one voice to start breaking the silence. The sound of that laugh didn't just echo in Jalen's ears. It echoed in his bones. As Mr. Denton moved on to the next student, the world didn't stop. But for Jalen, it might as well have. He sat motionless, staring at the same patch of carpet, as if he could fall through it and escape the tightening weight in his chest. Outside, someone's dad was probably pulling into the parking lot. Inside, the sun kept streaming through the windows. But Jalen didn't notice any of it. His mind replayed the moment in slow motion, not just the words, but the way Mr. Denton looked at him, like he was playing pretend in a room that had no space for make-believe. It wasn't just disbelief. It was dismissal. He had felt invisible before, when other kids didn't pick him for games, when someone talked over him in class. But this was different. This wasn't being forgotten. This was being seen and still not believed. Mila, the girl who sat next to him with a glitter-covered notebook and jelly bracelets, leaned over and whispered gently, "I believe you." He didn't speak, just nodded, barely. The words didn't feel safe in his throat anymore. His hands had stopped moving. His usual bounce had disappeared. He felt smaller, like something inside had been folded up and stuffed away. The morning continued. Jacob's dad came in dressed like a firefighter. Chloe's mom talked about her bakery and passed around warm sugar cookies. The class clapped. They laughed. They asked questions. But Jalen didn't move. When lunchtime came, he took out a sandwich but didn't touch it. Not even the crust, the part he usually devoured first. He sat at the end of the lunch table, while the others cracked jokes, played foot games on the bench, and laughed so loud the cafeteria buzzed with chaos. Jalen sat in silence, the white noise of trays and juice boxes barely reaching his ears. He could feel it, that moment from earlier, still stuck to him like a shadow. Not just the embarrassment, not even the laughter. It was the speed of it, how quickly someone in charge, someone who was supposed to lift kids up, could tear one down with a single chuckle. He thought about the drawing he had made, his dad holding a satellite in one hand, Earth in the other. It suddenly felt stupid. He had spent an hour coloring in the stars, using his favorite gel pen for the title. My dad works for NASA. Now, even the title made him feel like a fool. By recess, he had ripped it into 4 uneven pieces. He crumpled them into a tight ball and shoved it to the bottom of his backpack, burying it like it had never existed. In a quiet moment behind the swings, he muttered to himself, "Maybe I should have just said he worked at Target." It wasn't that Jalen wasn't proud anymore. It was that something in him started to wonder if being proud was worth it, if it would always feel this heavy when no one else believed you. He wasn't thinking about space anymore, or Mars, or communication relays. He was thinking about the classroom, about that look on Mr. Denton's face, about the way the other kids giggled, like they had all silently agreed he wasn't worth listening to. And beneath all that shame, another feeling stirred, a quieter one. Doubt, not about his father, but about himself. What if Mr. Denton was right? What if kids like him weren't supposed to have dads like that? He shook his head as if he could shake the thought loose, but it clung to him like static. Back in the classroom, the day dragged. Spelling quizzes, math drills, a reading circle. The usual rhythm, only now it all felt offbeat. Mr. Denton returned to his usual self, moving around the room with forced energy, calling on kids, writing words on the whiteboard with flair. But he didn't look at Jalen. Not once. Not until mid-afternoon, when he caught a glimpse of the boy's slumped shoulders and empty eyes. Something flickered in Mr. Denton's expression. His jaw clenched. He opened his mouth slightly, like he wanted to say something, but the words didn't come. He just kept teaching. But Jalen wasn't listening, because something in him had gone silent. Not the loud kind of silence that cries for help, the quiet kind that builds walls. And outside that wall, someone was about to walk through the door and change everything. The bell rang, but it didn't break the silence inside Jalen. He didn't flinch, didn't look up, just reached into his desk and started organizing his pencils like it was any other day, except it wasn't. Something about the way his hands moved, slower, tighter, said everything his mouth couldn't. By now, Mr. Denton had noticed, not just the stillness, but the weight behind it. Jalen wasn't sulking. He wasn't pouting or misbehaving. That would have been easier to handle. No, he was quiet in a way that felt unnatural, like a dimmer switch had been turned all the way down and no one knew how to flip it back. Mila watched him carefully. So did a few other kids, though none of them said a word. Not because they didn't care, but because no one had taught them what to say when someone's light goes out. The classroom air felt thicker now, like everyone was holding their breath, waiting for the next part of the day to wash it all away. But Jalen wasn't waiting. He was just surviving it. He stared out the window at the parking lot, where parents would start arriving soon. That's where his hope lived now. Out there, in the heat wave shimmering above the asphalt, in the glint of a silver bumper, in the hope that his dad would show up and make it all right again. But underneath that hope lived doubt, the ugly kind, the kind that doesn't shout or argue. It just whispers. What if he doesn't come? What if he's too busy? What if Mr. Denton was right? That last one hurt the most, not because he believed it, but because a part of him had started to. The final hour of the day was reserved for the main event, parent presentations. Desks were being moved into rows. The whiteboard easel had been pushed to the side. Mr. Denton stepped in and out of the classroom, clipboard in hand, calling parents in one at a time from the hallway. Kids fidgeted, whispered, grinned as their turn approached. Chloe's mom brought cupcakes. Thomas's uncle, a mechanic, passed around a tire pressure gauge like it was a sacred artifact. The class leaned and laughed, clapped. Jalen didn't. He sat with his palms flat against his thighs, knees bouncing softly beneath the desk. The clock ticked louder than usual, every second dragging its feet, like it didn't want to reach his turn. He kept glancing at the door, waiting for the navy blazer, the NASA badge, the man who always smelled faintly of machine oil and peppermint gum. He imagined the scene over and over, his dad walking in, calm and confident, the whole room going quiet. The looks on their faces when they saw he was real, really real. But the more he imagined it, the more impossible it started to feel. Doubt crept in again, wrapping around his chest like cold fingers. Maybe he got stuck in traffic. Maybe he forgot. Maybe he didn't want to come after all. That one hit hardest. Not because Jalen believed it, but because when someone important doubts you, especially someone with a nameplate on the front desk, it shakes something inside. Even if you know the truth, even if you've lived it, it makes you wonder if truth alone is enough. Mr. Denton peeked back into the room, calling the next name. His voice had lost a bit of its usual smoothness. Maybe it was guilt, maybe it was nothing, but he glanced at Jalen this time, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. Jalen didn't look back. He couldn't. The backpack by his desk still held the torn-up drawing, the satellite, the badge, the words, "My dad works for NASA." He almost wanted to take it out and try again. Almost. Instead, he sat frozen in a room that kept moving without him. 15 minutes left for parents to go. Each second felt like a step closer to either redemption or another wound. And with every name called, every laugh and clap, the space around Jalen felt tighter, like the air was slowly being drained from the room. And then a pause. Not the usual kind. Not the kind that meant someone was next. The kind that meant something was about to shift. Mr. Denton looked at his list, cleared his throat, and said, "Up next, we have..." He didn't finish the sentence, because the door had already opened, and in walked a man who didn't need to explain anything, because the badge on his chest told the truth louder than words ever could. The classroom didn't gasp. No one clapped. No dramatic music played. But when Dr. Kelvin Brooks stepped through the door, time seemed to hesitate. He wore a navy blazer, crisp white shirt, charcoal slacks. But none of that mattered. What caught every eye in the room was the small rectangle clipped to his chest. The NASA badge. Real, clear, undeniable. The sunlight from the window hit it just right, and the silver lettering reflected a soft gleam across the floor. It was as if truth had chosen to arrive with no need for an entrance. It simply was. Kelvin scanned the room once, his calm, measured gaze settling on one person. Jalen. The boy straightened so quickly his chair screeched across the tile. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. His heart thumped so loud it could have knocked over the desk. His dad had come, not just on time. Early, waiting in the hallway, waiting long enough to hear the very moment his son's truth was doubted. Kelvin didn't smile right away. No big gestures. No theatrics. Just a subtle nod. Solid. Grounded. "Hello," he said, voice deep but soft. "I'm Dr. Brooks. I designed spacecraft." Silence. Not the heavy kind from earlier. This one carried weight, yes, but also something else. Realization. Mr. Denton blinked. His clipboard tilted slightly in his hand, like it had suddenly become too heavy to hold. His lips parted as if to say something, but nothing came out. Jalin was still staring. But this time, he wasn't folding it on himself. He was unfolding. He was rising, not in stature, but in presence. Because what had just walked through the door wasn't just his dad. It was proof. It was restoration. It was the moment the world flipped back upright. Kelvin stepped forward with a quiet confidence that filled every inch of the room. He looked over at Mr. Denton and gave him a polite nod, respectful, but not submissive. Then he turned to the class. "So," he said, scanning the rows of wide-eyed third graders, "you're all learning about jobs today?" One hand shot up immediately. "Do you fly rockets?" Kelvin chuckled just once. "Not quite. I help build the systems that allow rockets to talk to us after they leave Earth." He paused, let it sink in. "Think of it like this. Spacecraft need phones, and we build the phones." Another hand, "Like space iPhones?" Kelvin smiled. "Sure, but with really bad reception." That one landed. Laughter bubbled up. Even Jalin smiled. His first real one since that morning. The kind that reaches the eyes and softens the shoulders. Kelvin clicked a button on the screen. A slideshow began. Cartoon rockets, diagrams of satellites, images of the Mars Relay Project. Colorful, sharp, full of wonder. One slide showed him in front of a massive console at the Jet Propulsion Lab, wires and screens glowing behind him. "What you're seeing," he explained, "is part of how we stay connected to robots on another planet. We make sure they can call home." The class leaned in, completely captivated, except Mr. Denton. He stood off to the side, quiet. His eyes shifted from the screen to Kelvin, then to Jalin, who now sat taller than he had all day. And Kelvin? He didn't mention what happened earlier, didn't point fingers, didn't need to. His existence had already said more than enough. But just before wrapping up, he paused, let the final slide linger. A photo of him and Jalin at the NASA facility, both wearing badges, both grinning like they owned the sky. He turned to the class once more. "By the way," he said calmly, "I heard someone earlier say that working at NASA might be unrealistic." The word hung in the air like a dare. Kelvin turned, eyes resting on his son. "Well," he continued, "I guess some people have a different definition of realistic." And this time he smiled, not the polite kind, the earned kind. Jalin beamed, his fists relaxed, his back straightened. The shift was undeniable. Kids around him who had smirked before were now nodding, whispering to each other. There was no more laughter, just a quiet kind of awe. Even Mila leaned in again. "Told you so," she whispered. But while the room had changed, the man holding the clipboard hadn't said a single word. And what came next would define everything. Sometimes, all it takes is one person walking into a room to remind us, you're not crazy. You're not alone. You're just early. If you felt something shift when Dr. Brooks stepped in, if that moment gave you chills, drop your first name and the city you're watching from in the comments. In the next video, we're going to send a special shout out to some of you, because your voice matters. Your story matters. And this is just the beginning. Let's build something together. For a long moment after Dr. Brooks walked out, the room held its breath. The door clicked gently behind him, but the tension he left behind didn't move. It stretched across the whiteboard, hovered over the rows of desks, and settled heavily on the man still holding the clipboard. Mr. Denton stood frozen, eyes locked on the space where Kelvin had just stood. One hand gripped the side of the desk. The other dangled awkwardly by his hip, like it had forgotten what to do. For the first time all day, he didn't know what to say. The usual rhythm he commanded, the light sarcasm, the smooth transitions, the half-rehearsed charm, was gone. And the kids? They weren't looking at him anymore. They were looking at Jalen. Jalen didn't gloat. He didn't smirk or rub it in. He simply sat there, a quiet glow in his chest, his chin a little higher, his eyes steady. Not angry, not vengeful, just whole again. Mr. Denton cleared his throat, the sound brittle and out of place. "Well," he said, voice thinner than before, "let's thank Dr. Brooks for that informative presentation." A few kids clapped. Mila led the applause with soft but certain hands, and others followed. But there was a distance in the sound, like they were still somewhere else, replaying everything they had just witnessed. Mr. Denton moved on to the next parent on the list, but his usual flow was off. His voice faltered. He stumbled slightly over the words, and though he tried to smile, it didn't reach his eyes. No one was paying attention to tire gauges or cupcakes anymore, because they had just seen something rare. A man walk in and rewrite the story, without anger, without revenge, just by being exactly who he said he was. After the final presentation, backpacks were zipped, chairs scraped against tile, and the usual end-of-day buzz filled the room. But Jalen didn't rush. He stayed in his seat, hands folded neatly, watching as the others filtered out. His heart was still beating faster than usual, but it wasn't fear now. It was peace, a kind he hadn't expected to feel today. Mr. Denton lingered near the supply cabinet, pretending to organize markers. But eventually, he made his way over to Jalen's desk, the weight of his footsteps uneven. He stood there for a second, just a man, not a teacher, not a voice of authority. Shifted his weight, trying to find the right words. "Hey," he started, too casually, like he was hoping to disguise a moment. "Your dad seemed like a pretty smart guy." Jalen looked up slowly. "He is." Silence again. Mr. Denton nodded. "I can see that. I wanted to say I may have jumped the gun earlier." No response. He cleared his throat. "What I meant to say is, sometimes teachers, people, make mistakes. We don't always realize when something we say comes out wrong." Jalen stared for a long second, then said quietly, "But you laughed." That landed harder than any silence. Mr. Denton's face tightened. "Yeah," he admitted, "I did, and I'm sorry for that. It wasn't right. I should have listened." Still, Jalen didn't make it easier for him. He didn't nod, didn't offer a smile or a quick, "It's okay." He just watched, steady and unreadable, like someone who had learned too quickly what it felt like to be dismissed. "I hope," Mr. Denton added, "you'll give me a chance to do better." Jalen stood slowly, slung his backpack over one shoulder. His voice, when it came, was calm and direct. "It wasn't your imagination. That's really my dad." Then he walked out, not triumphant, not dramatic, just done. And Mr. Denton? He stayed behind, one hand still on the empty desk, the other buried deep in his pocket. The classroom emptied, but the echo remained, not just in the air, but in his face, like something had cracked open inside him. It wasn't about being wrong anymore. It was about what that moment could have done to a child's belief in his own voice. And some lessons don't come with worksheets or applause, just silence and the quiet weight of learning too late. The Arizona sky was melting into orange and soft purple as the sun dipped behind the rooftops. The world looked calm outside, but inside Jalen, something was still unraveling. He sat at the kitchen table with a half-eaten bowl of cereal, dinner by choice. The spoon rested in the milk. He wasn't hungry. Not really. Kelvin leaned against the counter, sipping from a chipped ceramic mug that said Space Nerd in faded blue letters. He hadn't spoken much since they got home. Neither had Jalen. But it wasn't awkward. It was something else. Thick, unsettled, real. Jalen finally looked up. His voice, when it came, was small but steady. "Did you hear him?" Kelvin lowered the mug slightly. "Your teacher?" Jalen nodded. "When I told him you worked at NASA," he laughed. Kelvin set the mug on the counter. The clink against the tile was gentle but final. He walked over and sat across from his son. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I heard." Jalen's eyes dropped back to the cereal. He stirred it slowly, watching the rings of milk ripple like distant galaxies. "Why do people do that?" he asked. Kelvin's reply didn't come right away. He folded his hands, thoughtful. His voice, when it came, was low and honest. "Sometimes people live in small boxes, and when something doesn't fit inside, they laugh. Not because it's funny, but because it's easier than believing something bigger might exist." Jalyn frowned. "Was it because of me? Because I said it wrong?" Kelvin leaned in, voice firm now. "No, you didn't do anything wrong." "But it felt like I did," Jalyn whispered. "I didn't feel smart anymore." Kelvin's expression shifted, a storm of hurt crossing his face. Not for himself, for his son. He reached across the table, laid a hand gently on Jalyn's. "Don't let someone else's doubt erase your truth. You know who you are. You know who I am. And that's what matters." Jalyn nodded, just a little, like he wanted to believe it, but something in his chest still pulled. "You told me the truth doesn't need applause," he said, "but it still hurts when nobody claps." Kelvin gave a soft laugh, not dismissive. "Just real. I know, buddy. It hurts." And for a second, neither of them said a word, just two humans at a table. One learning how the world works, the other remembering what it once felt like to learn. Kelvin stood and walked toward the living room, then paused. "You did good today," he said over his shoulder. "You held your ground. That's brave." But as the night grew quiet and hum of the refrigerator filled the space between words, Jalyn was still wrestling with something deeper, something even his father couldn't quite reach. Because when someone with power laughs at your truth, it doesn't just sting, it roots. It roots in your ribs. It whispers in your ear when you try to speak again. It makes you wonder if next time it's safer to stay quiet. That night, lying in bed, Jalyn stared at the ceiling. The glow-in-the-dark stars above him blinked faintly, as if unsure of their own shine. He thought about the drawing he had torn up, the one with his dad holding Earth and a satellite. He regretted destroying it. But more than that, he regretted that, even for a second, he had believed the laugh. He pulled the blankets up tighter, tucked his fist beneath his pillow, and whispered to no one, "I knew I was telling the truth." But knowing it didn't make it hurt less. Not yet. If you've ever been made to feel small for telling the truth, you're not alone. This channel was built by people who believe in stories that matter. Stories like yours. Hit that like button and subscribe to be part of this community. We don't make videos for clicks. We make them with heart. And your support makes all the difference. The next morning began the same as any other, but nothing felt the same. The air was cool inside the house, a soft hum from the AC running through the vents. The floor felt cold beneath Jalyn's bare feet as he padded into the kitchen, pajamas rumpled and eyes still foggy from sleep. The smell of toasted cinnamon waffles drifted through the air, warm and buttery, blending with a faint trace of machine oil still clinging to his dad's work jacket draped over a chair. Kelvin stood at the counter, stirring something in a thermos, the metal spoon clinking gently. He looked up, met Jalyn's gaze, and offered a nod, not too cheerful, not too heavy. "Just solid. Sleep okay?" he asked. Jalyn shrugged, rubbing his eyes. Kelvin leaned against the counter, sipping his coffee slowly, that same Chip Space Nerd mug in his hand. The steam curled upward, carrying with it the earthy scent of dark roast and something deeper, presence, stability. Neither of them spoke much, but the silence wasn't broken this time. It was shared, and sometimes that was enough. As they walked to school together, the wind carried a faint bite, not quite cold, but just enough to raise goosebumps on Jalyn's arms beneath his jacket. The trees lining the sidewalk rustled softly, their leaves whispering secrets he couldn't quite hear. His backpack bounced gently with every step, but it didn't feel heavy. Not today. When they reached the gate, Kelvin knelt, the smell of his cologne, cedar, and mint briefly wrapping around Jalyn like a shield, and looked his son in the eyes. "You good?" he asked. Jalyn nodded. "I think so." Kelvin smiled and tapped two fingers to the NASA badge on his chest. "Remember, the truth doesn't shrink." Then he stood and walked back toward the car, and Jalyn stepped forward. The hallway felt louder than usual. Sneakers squeaked against linoleum. Kids shouted across lockers. A teacher's mug clinked loudly as it hit a desk. But Jalen moved through the chaos with quiet clarity. He wasn't floating. He wasn't flying. But he wasn't hiding anymore either. When he entered the classroom, a few heads turned. One boy from the day before, the same one who had whispered, "Yeah, right," gave him a subtle nod. Not exaggerated. Not fake. Just real. Another leaned over and asked, "Did your dad really work on Mars stuff?" Jalen nodded once. "Yeah, Mars relay." The boy blinked. Cool. No teasing. No test. Just curiosity. During morning reading time, Mila slid into the seat beside him, her glitter notebook already open. "They believe you now," she whispered, smiling as she flipped to a fresh page. Jalen shrugged, but there was a flicker behind his eyes. "They didn't have to," he said, but deep down it felt good. No, it felt right. That afternoon, the air inside the classroom felt less stale. Sunlight poured through the windows in long, golden strips that warmed Jalen's arms. He leaned into his desk, his hand tracing slow lines in the wood grain with his fingertip. Grounded. In the corner of the room, Mr. Denton shuffled papers at his desk. His movements were slower, less automatic. Every so often, his eyes lifted toward Jalen, not to monitor, just to look, to see. After lunch, Jalen returned to find something in his cubby. Not candy, not a certificate. Just a folded sheet of line paper, edges slightly curled, ink a little smudged. He opened it. No header, just handwriting. "Jalen, I was wrong. You shouldn't have had to prove anything to us. Keep dreaming big, Mr. Denton." Jalen didn't smile, didn't read it twice. He folded it carefully, slipped it into the front pocket of his backpack, and zipped it shut. He hadn't needed the apology, but maybe someone else needed to write it. And maybe that was enough, because the strongest comebacks aren't loud. They're steady. They come from boys who kept walking when the world told them to sit down. The bell rang sharp and clear, cutting through the warm hum of afternoon chatter. It echoed faintly against the tile, leaving behind a trail of squeaking chairs and rustling backpacks. But Jalen didn't rush. He moved with purpose, not slow, not hesitant, but deliberate, like someone who had decided that every step mattered. The hallways smelled like pencil shavings, cafeteria pizza, and floor wax, that oddly comforting school mix. The fluorescent lights buzzed above, flickering slightly as he passed under them, casting brief shadows that danced at his feet. As he turned the corner toward the science room for after-school club, he felt something strange in his chest. Not anxiety, not fear, anticipation. He'd almost skipped it. Just days before he might have, but not now. Not today. Inside the room, Ms. Contreras was unpacking a box of robotics kits, the plastic bags crinkling loudly in the quiet space. The air smelled faintly of soldering metal and dry markers. Jalen took a seat up front. That alone was different. A few other kids filtered in, including two from his class who had laughed earlier that week. One of them gave Jalen a cautious glance. The other sat beside him. "Your dad really builds stuff that talks to Mars?" the boy asked, adjusting the sleeves of his hoodie. Jalen nodded. "It's called the Mars Relay. It helps the rover send messages back to Earth." The boy blinked. "That's sick." Ms. Contreras clapped her hands. "Okay, scientists, let's build." As the group started assembling their kits, Jalen's fingers moved with steady confidence. He sorted the pieces, gears, wires, sensors, laying them out like tiny puzzle fragments. The table vibrated lightly under his touch, the plastic cool against his fingertips. For the first time, he became the one others looked to. He helped the girl connect her motor wires, guiding her hand gently as she struggled with the polarity. He explained torque in simple terms to another, using a water bottle as a visual. Not once did he say his dad taught him, not because he wasn't proud, but because he didn't need the badge anymore. He had become his own. Later that evening, walking home under a sky painted with streaks of orange and lavender, Jalen held his jacket tighter against the breeze. The wind had picked up, dry and dusty, carrying that familiar desert scent, like warm sand and brittle leaves. A group of older kids biked past him on the sidewalk, and one of them called out, "Hey, NASA kid!" For a second, his chest tightened. Old reflex. But the voice wasn't mocking. It was playful, curious. The boy gave him a thumbs up as he disappeared around the corner. Jalon smiled to himself. At dinner, he helped set the table without being asked. The plates were cool in his hands, the napkin soft and slightly crumpled from the drawer. His fingers brushed his dad's wrist briefly as they both reached for the same fork, and Kelvin paused. "You're quiet today," he said, raising an eyebrow. Jalon shrugged. "Just thinking." Kelvin sipped his water, the ice clinking gently. "Good thinking, or the kind that keeps you up at night?" Jalon smiled, a soft one, not wide, just honest. "Both." They ate in peace. Later that night, Jalon dug through his backpack and pulled out a fresh sheet of paper. The crumpled pieces from before were gone, but this page was new, clean. He didn't draw rockets or satellites this time. He drew a kid at a desk, explaining something to a group. In his hand wasn't a badge. It was a screwdriver. And beneath the picture, he wrote in blocky, uneven letters, "Truth builds things." He stared at it for a long time, letting the pencil rest against the paper. Then he folded it carefully and slid it into the pocket of his backpack, not to show, not yet, just to carry. Because sometimes, building something new starts with carrying one piece of yourself a little further than you could the day before. It started with a flyer, bright blue, taped crookedly to the classroom door. School-wide Career Week Showcase, Friday. Students from each class will present what they learned. Parents welcome. Jalon's stomach sank the second he saw it. He stood there, the hallway buzzing around him, lockers slamming, shoes squeaking, a faint trail of someone's too strong perfume mixing with cafeteria grease in the air. But all he saw was a flyer. Public presentation. Microphone. On stage. He backed away from the door slowly, the heat climbing up his neck. His palms began to sweat, fingers twitching against the edge of his hoodie pocket. He thought he was past this. But the laugh, that laugh, echoed again in his chest. In class, Mr. Denton addressed the announcement with an awkward smile. "We'll be selecting 1 or 2 students from each class to represent us. Someone who really absorbed the meaning of Career Week." His voice floated over the room like dry chalk dust. He didn't look directly at Jalon, but the glance was there, brief, hesitant. Jalon kept his eyes on his desk, tracing a crack in the wood with his thumbnail. That night, he sat in bed staring at the ceiling. The glow-in-the-dark stars blinked down at him again. He could hear the low hum of the dishwasher in the kitchen, the muffled bass of the neighbor's TV through the wall. He could hear his own breathing. Slow, uneven. He didn't want the spotlight. Not anymore. But the part of him that had ripped up that drawing, that part whispered, "Are you really going to stay small forever?" Friday came fast. Too fast. The gymnasium smelled like sweat, rubber mats, and fresh popcorn from a concession table outside. Rows of folding chairs squeaked as parents shuffled into them. The mic popped once, then again as Principal Hughes tapped it. "Let's give a warm welcome to our next student from Ms. Worthington's 3rd grade class." Jalon's heart thudded like a drum. He wasn't the only name on the list, but he had been asked to go last. His fingers trembled slightly as he stepped behind the curtain. The thick velvet felt rough under his fingertips, like sandpaper wrapped in fabric. Behind him, someone whispered encouragement, but it barely registered. The lights were warm, too warm. Sweat beaded on his brow. He could have walked away. No one would blame him. He had already told the truth once. Wasn't that enough? He peeked through the curtain and saw his dad in the audience, standing near the back, arms crossed, still, calm, his badge clipped to his belt, not for show, but because that's just who he was. Kelvin caught his eyes, gave a slight nod, like he had that first day. No pressure, just presence. Jalon stepped forward. The mic stand was taller than he expected. His voice cracked slightly as he adjusted it. He could feel hundreds of eyes. The warmth from the stage lights pressed against his face like sun on a summer windshield. He took a breath, and then another, and then something shifted. He reached into his pocket, unfolded the drawing he had made days ago. Not the one he tore up, the new one, the one that showed a kid building, not just talking. He held it up, "My name is Jalen Brooks," he said, voice steady now. "And this week, I learned that careers aren't just jobs. They're stories." A pause. Deep breath. Some people think big jobs belong to other people, but I think they belong to anyone who's not afraid to keep telling the truth, even when it's hard. A murmur from the crowd. Someone, maybe a teacher, whispered, "Wow, my dad builds spacecraft systems for NASA. And yeah, that's cool. But the coolest thing he ever did was show up and tell me that I didn't have to shrink just because someone else didn't believe me." The gym was silent now. Jalen smiled. Not big, just honest. Careers start with what you believe about yourself. And I believe I'm ready to build. He folded the drawing again, nodded once, then walked off stage. There was a moment of stunned quiet, and then applause. Not loud, not wild, but real. The kind that grows from the chest. The kind you feel more than hear. Backstage, Mr. Denton was waiting. He didn't speak, just placed a hand gently on Jalen's shoulder. And for the first time, it didn't feel heavy. It felt right. Because the biggest moments don't come with spotlights. They come with choice, and Jalen had just made his. If you felt that, if something in you stirred when Jalen stood on that stage and told the truth anyway, you're exactly who we make these stories for. So don't just watch and disappear. Subscribe. Join a space where voices like yours, brave, quiet, and true, are seen, heard, and honored, because this isn't just content, it's community. And in the next story, it might be your turn to stand up. The day after the showcase, the school felt different. The halls were the same, scuffed floors, posters curling off the walls, that familiar scent of pencil graphite and aging books. But there was a shift, not in the building, in how it looked at him. Jalen walked in with his backpack, snug over both shoulders. No hoodie to hide behind today. The morning sun followed him through the door, casting his shadow long across the linoleum. Eyes turned toward him, but not in the way they had before. Not like suspicion, like recognition. At recess, a group of kids from older grades waved him over to the handball court. One asked if he could show them how those Mars things worked sometime. Another simply said, "That was brave, what you said." He didn't puff up, didn't downplay it either. Just nodded. That was enough. Back in class, Mr. Denton read aloud a story about explorers who traveled across unknown lands. When he finished, he looked up, and for the first time in days, his eyes met Jalen's without flinching. "I think Jalen taught us something about exploring," he said quietly. "Not just places, but truth." No one laughed, not even a whisper. That afternoon, the scent of sun-warmed asphalt hit as students poured into the courtyard for pickup. Jalen sat on the bench beneath the elm tree, the one whose leaves always fell early, watching the wind stir tiny whirlwinds of dust. He opened his backpack, pulled out the drawing from the presentation. He traced the folds with his finger. He thought about keeping it forever. But then he stood, walked over to the bulletin board outside the library, the one with student work that inspires in peeling gold letters, tacked it there. No name, no caption, just the drawing. A kid holding a screwdriver. Underneath, 3 words, "Truth builds things." He stepped back and looked at it one last time. It didn't feel like giving something away. It felt like planting a seed. That evening at home, he sat beside his dad on the couch, wrapped in a blanket that smelled faintly of detergent and old sunshine. The TV was on low, playing a nature documentary neither of them was really watching. Kelvin sipped from his favorite mug. Space Nerd chipped near the handle. Jalen leaned his head against his dad's shoulder, the cotton of his shirt soft, familiar. "You did good," Kelvin said. "I know," Jalen replied. The silence after that wasn't awkward. It was whole, because the journey hadn't just made him stronger. It made him visible to others, yes, but most importantly to himself. Because some kids don't need to raise their voices to be heard. They just need to speak the truth and believe it loud enough for the world to catch up. You don't forget the moment someone doubts your voice. You don't forget the sound of a laugh that wasn't meant to be cruel, but was. You don't forget shrinking in a room full of people just for telling the truth. And if that's ever happened to you, You know exactly what Jalen felt. Maybe it wasn't about a parent. Maybe it was your dream, your story, your identity, your vision of who you could become. Maybe someone told you it was too much, too far, too impossible. And maybe, just maybe, you started to believe them, even for a second. But here's the truth Jalen had to learn the hard way, and maybe you do too. Someone else's limits don't define your truth. The world might not clap the first time you speak. They might laugh, dismiss, roll their eyes. But if you know who you are, you don't owe them proof. You owe yourself consistency. And the people watching, the ones too scared to speak, they're not waiting for perfection. They're waiting for permission. Permission to believe in something bigger than the box they were handed. That's what Jalen gave them. And now it's your turn. So if this story reminded you of a time when someone told you be more realistic, drop it in the comments. Or better yet, tell us what your truth is. What dream do you carry that no one claps for yet? Write it down. Say it out loud. Or just leave emoji a heart in the comments to let us know you're still building. Even if it's quiet, even if it's hard. And if you believe more people need to hear stories like this, give this video a like. Share it with someone who's on the edge of giving up. You never know how far one moment of belief can go, because the world needs less doubt and more Jalens. And if no one's told you today, your story is still worth telling. Keep going, long after the applause faded, long after the chairs in the gym were stacked. The stage lights cooled, and the bulletin board outside the library gathered new drawings. The truth stayed, not just the facts, but the feeling of a boy who was told to sit down and stood anyway, the feeling of a classroom that learned not from a textbook, but from a moment, the feeling of a teacher who had to face the weight of one careless laugh. And what it almost stole, Jalen didn't become a celebrity. He didn't go viral. There was no medal, no certificate, no special parking spot. But something shifted, not just in him, in the room, in the school, in the way people listen. A week later, another student, smaller than Jalen, quieter, stood in front of the class during free speech time and said, "My mom cleans offices, and that matters." And no one laughed, because someone already had the courage to go first. That's the thing about truth. It's not always loud. It's not always pretty. It doesn't always win the moment, but it leaves fingerprints on the people who hear it. And the next time they feel small, it reminds them what big actually looks like. Jalen didn't set out to inspire anyone. He just told the truth. And in a world full of noise, sometimes that's the most radical thing you can do. So if you're still here, still listening, remember this. There will always be voices trying to shrink you, but they can't take what's real. They can't undo your roots. And they definitely can't erase your voice unless you hand it over. So don't. Protect your voice. Speak your truth. And build something no one else can. Not because it's easy, but because it's yours.